Understanding your data. As we said earlier, the first thing that you need to do before creating a good pivot table is to try understand your data. The data in front of you now, I would classify as relatively simple. You may come across way more complicated data sources, and additionally, you may come across very simple data sources. Either or, we can still make a good pivot table from them. If we have a closer look at the data in front of you, it's named Data 1 and it's titled Sales for the various regions in South Africa. As we can see, for the first row, it's Western Cape with a revenue of 90,005. That revenue occurred in January, and that is part of the first quarter of 2017. And the rest of the rows follow a similar pattern. If we head over to another data source, Data 2, you may see that it gets a little bit more complicated. If we have a look at this data source, it's a lot more complicated. We have a list of accounts that are being opened up at the different banks. Different ways of opening it up. Different account types. Different initial deposits. The weekday and the date. As you can see, this list can get quite extensive. If we have a look at Data 3, this is the simplest data set of all of them. It's just name and gender. This will be an easy one to summarize in a pivot table. Let's head back to Data 1. Now that we have a good understanding of what's happening in Data 1, we can start to look for key things that might skew our pivot table. These three things include missing values, unclear headings, and spelling mistakes. Let's review. Which three of the following do we need to check our data for before creating a pivot table? The three things are complete data, relevant headings, and spelling mistakes. Before creating a pivot table, make sure that your data is complete. For example, D5 would be considered a missing value. So you would make sure to go through your data and fill in all the missing values. Secondly, we're going to check the headings. When creating a pivot table, your headings will be used as references. So if these don't accurately represent the information, you're going to have a hard time creating the pivot table. The last thing is spelling mistakes. If you set up a pivot table to summarize by province, and in one of the provinces there's a spelling mistake, you're going to have an extra entry on that summary. Let me show you a quick example. I am changing the spelling of D5 Western Cape and I'm adding an E on the end. If we pop over to the example I showed you earlier, right click on the pivot table and then select refresh, you're going to see a different line over here. This is going to throw off your pivot table. Okay, so let's go back and quickly fix that spelling mistake. Now that that spelling mistake is fixed, when I refresh the pivot table, it should go back to normal. Now that we know what the data means, we're going to try to see what information we could possibly want from the data. Before we go on to the next topic, let's review. Which best classifies the following cells? Year, quarter, month, province, and revenue. These cells are best classified as column headings.